You are listening to episode 233 of The Secular Buddhist. Welcome to The Secular Buddhist. I'm Ted Meissner. The Secular Buddhist is the official podcast of the Secular Buddhist Association, a grassroots-driven effort to answer the needs of secular teaching and practice for contemporary society. The podcast has interviews and roundtable discussions pertaining to engaged Buddhist training and practice, and the SBA website has show notes for each episode along with resource materials. Though the podcast focuses on core practices from a secular viewpoint, more traditional teachings are welcome and openly discussed. Jundo Cohen joins us to speak about concepts of secularity and religiosity in Buddhism. There is a misperception I sometimes encounter that may be familiar to you. It's the idea that there is just Buddhism, as if it's just one monolithic thing. Even breaking down into the main branches of Theravada, Mahayana, Vajrayana, and yes, I'm going to be presumptuous enough to consider secular a new fourth branch of the Buddhist tree, there are still lots of varieties in each. And yes, that includes secular Buddhism. There are many ways to this approach, including those which may honor religious aspects more closely. Jundo Cohen was born in New York in 1960, ordained and received Dharma transmission from Gudo Wafu Nishijima, and is a member of the American Zen Teachers Association and the Soto Zen Buddhist Association. Jundo began Zen practice in 1980, has lived in Japan for most years since that time, and was for many years a lay student of Azuma Ikuoroshi. He lives in Tsukuba, Japan with his wife and two small children, working as a translator of Japanese, and thus believes that the hard border between ordained priest and householder have long been vanishing in Soto Zen. So sit back, relax, and have a nice oyama sake. Cold, of course. Our guest today is Jundo Cohen. Jundo, welcome to the podcast.
Ted, very good to be here. I've been looking forward to this for a long time, and I think I've caught just about every episode you've ever had.
You're the one guy who's listened to all the episodes. Thanks. I appreciate that. And I want to extend my thanks as well in your reaching out and doing this podcast, because I don't often get to speak with a Soto Zen person. So it's good to have that opportunity. Thank you so much for that. So, Jundo, let's start by having you say a little bit about your background. How did you first come to Zen practice?
Well, I've been doing this now about 30 years. I've been living in Japan about 25 years, but I'm a priest with wife and two small kids, like many in the Japanese traditions. I also have a day job Monday to Friday. I'm a translator of Japanese. I am also a reformed lawyer, because that's how I got into Zen. When I was in law school about 30 years ago, I was thinking, analyzing, arguing, you know what lawyers do, very concerned about my career, money, smoking, overweight, you name it. Then I started Zen practice, which was a chance to drop that all aside. And the contrast between the quiet and the space of sitting and what was going on in my law school and my career worries and my personal dissatisfactions was obvious. And that was so many years ago, and I just continued after that. So when I finally did come to Japan, I found that there's really not a lot of opportunity here for a foreigner who wants to train as a priest, unless you want to go the traditional Japanese model, which of course is to go to one of the big monasteries like Eiheiji or Sojiji and then become a local parish priest performing funerals and memorial services for the local people. And that was really, like most Westerners, that was not my main interest in Zen practice. I was interested in Zazen. So then I met Nishijima Gudo Wafu, who was also a working man all his life and became a Zen priest later in life. He was a translator of Dogen's noted work, the Shobogenzo, and some other things. And Nishijima gave me a place to be. He's also the teacher of some other people you may know, like Brad Warner. And he was someone who said you can be a working man, you can be a father, and you can be a priest, because we practice Zazen, we help others practice Zazen, and there's no conflict amongst all these things. And when I found that home with Nishijima, well, that's when I decided to be a Zen priest.
Thank you for sharing that background. And to me, I'm always interested in that progress on the path of the ox herding pictures. And what always stood out for me with those is you start by just being in the world and then seeing the tail of the ox and pursuing it and riding it and goes through the various stages of these 10 pictures. And it doesn't end with the blank picture. It ends by you rejoining the world and being part of it. And I think that's part of what your teacher was saying, is this Zen, this practice, this present moment, what we do, it's in the world, it's embodied in life.
Dogen spoke of ongoing, constant practice enlightenment, which means that it's not so much a matter of stages, as each moment is an opportunity for practice, and we're always in the marketplace, and we're always reaching to find the Buddha within us and bring that to life. So every day is a new picture, not just the 10 ox herding pictures, I guess I would say.
Yeah, on each moment that may shift in where we are.
Yes.
So what we're here to talk about today is a topic that's near and dear to many of the listeners of this podcast, is how we may approach Buddhism in contemporary society, particularly for many of us who are Westerners, and what this is like. And you have this idea of religious secular Buddhism. And for those who are listening who might be going, well, what do we mean by that? Just pause for a moment and remember the times where people ask you about secular Buddhism. Let's open up our minds a little bit and see what that's like. Why don't you describe, Jundo, what that idea is? What do you mean by that?
Well, I was very happy to see that Donald Lopez in this month's Tricycle has an article in which he's calling for very much the same thing. And I've heard this from several voices now. Even Sam Harris, for example, who is someone I respect gratefully, says that we must not forget certain important experiences that we have that border on religiosity. And I think what I'm trying to say here is that we should not go to an extreme of discarding everything that is traditional, everything that is old, everything that smacks of a ceremony or a rather arcane practice, just because it's old and perhaps a little hard to understand. But at the same time, we must be very demanding, and I am in our Sangha, of eliminating what I believe. And by the way, I want to say this again and again. I am not the last word on what is true and false in this universe. But I believe, looking at much of the evidence and what we're now understanding about how the world works, that there are many things included in Buddhism that smack of myth, of superstition, of ahistorical fact. And we could perhaps preserve the power of these practices without some of that. At the same time, we do not need to throw everything out if we can find a place for some practices, honoring the tradition, honoring the purely practical reason for having them, and honoring the fact that by some interpretations, they are not in conflict with the findings of modern science, for example. But we have to be very careful in throwing out too much, even as we are critical of not keeping everything that's old, because some of it is, frankly, balderdash.
So let's unpack that a little bit. Maybe we can explore a couple of the terms that are involved with this and have you describe what that area looks like, understanding that lines aren't always straight and clear and tall and bright, that there may be some movement there. What do we mean by secular? What do we mean by religious within this context? How are you addressing them?
Well, let me start with the secular. Our practice, especially in the kind of Western Soto Zen I practice, is firmly grounded in this world, in our daily life, in our responsibilities, in relationships, work. We are citizens of society, and that is the place of our practice. At the same time, I believe that we must be skeptical about beliefs that perhaps are not borne up by evidence and perhaps conflict with much of what we're discovering about how this universe works. I do not believe, for example, in Mount Sumeru as a literal place, even though that was a core belief of Buddhism for thousands of years. And when Mount Sumeru began to be rejected in the 19th century as a literal belief in the way the Earth was geographically structured, it went down kicking and scratching. People to this day, Donald Lopez has some wonderful writing on this, but people to this day, in some corners, will insist that Mount Sumeru still exists just like it's described. If the good book says it, it must be true. And I say we can do without Mount Sumeru. Maybe we can take it as some kind of psychological presentation, teaching something, but it's not literally there, I believe. And so many of our other beliefs are much the same. So that is to me what it means to be secular and skeptical, and also to be, well, I'm open-minded to the possibility of anything. A fellow today came to our Sangha and asked about levitation. And I said, well, could be. I'm not the last word on this, but from all the evidence I've seen, no. I've never seen anyone levitate without the benefit of a little hocus pocus. And I will look at James Randi's work as someone who has done a lot to debunk people who make claims like that. So I do not personally believe in levitation. So in our Sangha, when people say mystical acts, I turn to an old cop-out that Zen masters have been using for hundreds of years. You know, some of the old Zen masters were asked by their students, hey, Zen master, you are supposed to be able to levitate and have telekinesis, and how come you don't seem to be doing this? And one of the things that the old Zen masters used to say is, oh, well, I can, but it would be too showy to I don't want to show off here. But the best cop-out, not cop-out, but it's more than that. It really is profound. The real mystical power of all of us is drinking a glass of water on a hot day, breathing, smiling. These are the real mystical powers. So in that way, I'll take a good smile and a deep breath over levitating anytime. But anyway, let's get to the religious side. Why are we religious? I believe even modern people can find a certain beauty, a certain wonder, mystery in this reality, this universe we live in. And it borders on the religious. Even Sam Harris in his book is speaking about an experience that is transcendent. And I believe it's the same experience that a mathematician, a physicist may sometimes perceive in their equations. A poet, a dancer losing herself in a dance may experience this wholeness, this wonder that borders on the religious. I believe that it is perfectly fine for skeptical people to still look at the stars and say, wow. To me, that's religion. Now, at the same time, even atheists these days are writing some papers. I was just looking through them, and it seems several atheists have said recently that even atheists need ceremonies. We need a church. We need a place to get together. We need rituals, because rituals like a wedding, a presidential inauguration, even a birthday party, they bring people together. So I think, there is a place even for a skeptic, even for someone who is down to earth to say, well, we can wear old-fashioned clothes like Buddhist robes because they represent the tradition. I can look at a figure such as Bodhidharma, the fellow who supposedly brought Zen from India to China, even though there's a lot of evidence that he was not quite a historical figure, that a lot of the stories about him were later impositions. Still, they're wonderful stories. They teach something very profound. So I can still hang a picture of Bodhidharma in our Zendo and say, well, that stands for something. Like Moses, another made-up figure. They're symbols of liberation. No problem. I can light incense because there is something about incense or a candle, for example, that makes a separation from our day-to-day lives and makes a kind of sacred space. So there are places for many, many of our practices, even when we demand that there be some pragmatic reason for them. That's why I'm religious.
Yeah, I like that, the way you shared that there are things we find in the natural world on a hot day having a glass of water that point to the depth and profundity of just a simple act, a normal thing we don't always notice. That there are wonders to be found in even just the commonplace, let alone the wonder of the natural universe, the natural world. And again, many people who've listened to the podcast know that I occasionally post Symphony of Science, because that moves me to tears every time I hear that song. And it's really, it is about the natural world and how, as people, even though we are secular, we are skeptics. As a member of the JREF, you brought up James Randi, the James Randi Education Foundation. Timing is great. They just had the amazing meeting a couple of weeks ago in Las Vegas. And it's about skepticism and critical thinking and how do we know what's going on in the natural world. And yet, and not in contrast to that, as part of that, we still have wonder as human beings in what's happening in the real world. And that we don't have to always take things as a literal truth to be inspired by them. We don't have to believe that George Washington, I cannot tell a lie, I chopped down the cherry tree. We don't have to believe that as a literal truth to have that as a story that's part of our lives that can inspire us. We don't have to believe in all of the stories about Bodhidharma and his focus and that angry picture we have of him and his concentrated face to have an inspiration, to feel some human connection to stories. In the same way that we don't have to believe that Brer Rabbit could actually talk in the stories that we nonetheless learn from and find value in. So thank you for sharing that. And I wanted to talk a little bit about something that you've introduced in this idea of religious secular Buddhism, which to me, what you describe is wholly within the realm of secular, and that the term religious may be one that people use to describe it. That's okay. That's fine. We don't have to always land on the same terms.
They're just words, Ted. One of the things we are in Zen is doing away with words, finding contradictory positions without the least conflict. I don't worry what the proper definition of religious or secular is. I know that I have a feeling of sacred existence in this world. I honor tradition, and at the same time, I am very hard as nails in our Sangha about demanding that there be a certain basis for many of our beliefs. Now, I'm going to say this. I'm a hypocrite because our cat died. And my little girl asked, where did our cat go? And I said, well, as a good daddy does, the cat has gone to heaven. Now, I do believe that there is a place. Now, by the way, again, I want to say this. I do not know if there is a heaven or a hell when we die. I want to underline this. I have no inside information here on this topic. Here's what I usually say on rebirth. I say that I've seen people make heavens and hells in this world for themselves all the time. And I say if you live gently in this world and avoid to do harm, well, if there is a future heaven, it's going to put you in good stead. But our Zen practice is focused on this life here. And we don't put too much worry about what comes next. It'll take care of itself. But when it came to my daughter, even though personally I'm rather skeptical on the cat literally being in heaven, I don't know. But I told her it was a sure thing. So I see that some people sometimes may need to benefit from all manner of beliefs, and that's fine. If it gives comfort, when I used to work in a hospice and someone asked me to pray with them to Jesus, and I'm not Christian, I would do it because it brought them comfort. But in our Sangha, I am going to be very strict about saying that, look, I am not the last word, but other people may find beauty in practice in other areas. But if you ask me personally, this belief is hocus pocus. This belief is balderdash, and this belief has no basis according to studies that are being done. It's a false claim. Now, when I talk that way, I've gotten myself actually kicked off of a couple of more conservative internet forums. It's no longer exists, so I can say the name, the infamous e-Sangha. If you put any challenge to rebirth, the post would be deleted and you would be gone. And I tried so hard. I said, I respect other people's right to believe in rebirth. I honor the fact that I'm not the last word and other teachers may have better insight. But if you ask me, well, let me just say it's not so important to my practice, so I don't pick it up. And that was very challenging to some people. But the fact is, it's not important to my practice.
Yep, I agree with you, and it isn't to many of us who are on the more secular side of the spectrum. And it's not that we're telling others, you have to think like we do too. In fact, it comes the other way around. I get told quite frequently, I can't call myself a Buddhist because I don't believe in a literal rebirth. And that most often happens by folks who have adopted the religious belief. They've given up something else, or this resonates with them. And it's great for you to have that belief. If it contributes to you doing the practice and being a better person in the world, that's fine. You can think about another one. I have no problem with that. What we'll often do, and this is sometimes a bit of a challenge, Jundo, you may have run into too, it sounds like, is just asking the question, I understand you have this belief about a literal rebirth. I don't have it. I don't understand it. And I'm openly claiming my innocence on this, my ignorance of it perhaps. Help me understand. What is it about this that has convinced you? And whatever gets shared, just unpacking that and exploring it. We can do that. It's appropriate for us to question that in the same way that it's appropriate for that person to question another person from a different tradition. Why do you believe in whatever their post-mortem belief is? And there it lands to a point where the discussion tends to not go much further, is how do you discern I'm accepting this belief that doesn't have evidence, and I'm rejecting another belief that doesn't have evidence? How do you make that decision? That's the point of curiosity for me, because as a secular person, it's all just different stories about this. And it's not to disparage them. It's how do they impact you in your life today?
I often say that one man's silly story is another man's sacred book, and you have to honor that. But at the same time, I feel it's perfectly fine for some of us who are skeptical to speak out and to challenge some ideas and say, we honor the right of other people to say this, but perhaps the evidence is not there. Perhaps there is reasons to doubt this. We can be like Stephen Batchelor, a little bit, upfront about the fact that we doubt some things. We don't have to be so defensive about it. But by the way, I want to criticize Stephen Batchelor for a second.
Let's open that door, yes. You mentioned you wanted to go there. Let's go there.
Yeah, I actually want to speak about a couple of things. One thing is we have to be careful about going to some other extremes. I do not believe that science is the last word for all things. I am not that much of a materialist. For example, I believe that for all our understanding of chemistry and biology, that nothing truly captures love, which is an emergent phenomenon. That poets might do a better job of capturing the beauty of a mountain than all scientists' understanding about geology and light. So I think that there is a place for us to go beyond a purely scientific interpretation of many, many things. Sometimes our approach to Buddhism must be more like art, must be more like poetry or literature, because we're expressing something that cannot just simply be reduced to an equation. So if we're too much materialistic about some things, that is bad too. I'm not saying Stephen Batchelor, but I'll get to him in a second. The other people that bother me, if I got a whole list here. Can I get down the list, Ted?
You can go through a few of the list, yeah.
Then there's a whole bunch of Buddhist teachers who, whatever they're teaching, it's science. If they put the word quantum in, it must be science.
Oh, I think you're poking the aneurysm in my brain. It's ready to go when I hear quantum.
There's one famous Eastern teacher, is a Westerner, who I think he was on the internet. He hooked himself up to an EEG, a mini EEG, to prove he has no brain waves. Maybe you've seen this video. And he was claiming, of course, that is scientific evidence for his abilities. And other people said, you're misusing the EEG machine. You're kind of have you checked the wires?
Yeah, you're cooking the books. It's not a valid test.
So I'm also against, when I say that the things in Buddhism have to be defensible from the point of view of science, I'm not saying that science is the last word, because it's neither. It is for beauty or love. But on the other hand, you can't just claim anything is science, like so many Buddhist teachers do these days. I'm talking about, let's get real here.
Yeah, and just adding on for a moment to that, and I appreciate the perspective of this, and these are conversations that I get into fairly frequently, not surprisingly, that science is, people often take it, and I hear this word scientism a lot, that there's a tone of anti-knowledge, anti-understanding, anti-reason, and I just want to qualify something that science is about one thing only. It's a process for describing, for discerning what we know and what we find in the natural world and nothing else. It's not an ideological stance. And so when people say, well, scientism, that's just analyzing things and it doesn't have any heart to it and it doesn't describe, for example, love or the experience of climbing a mountain or something like that. Totally agree. That's not what it's there for. That's a human experience. And it doesn't mean that there isn't an underlying natural world of, yes, there are light photons hitting eyes and causing changes and all the rest of this stuff, and it's interpreted in the brain. Yes, that's all there. And we learn about that through a process of science. But there's still a human experience. How did this move you? Science doesn't take away from that at all.
That's right. There's a lot of parallel between walking through the mountains and religious practice, if you ask me. We're on a great mountain. But let me talk to Stephen Batchelor, if I say, because there's like many of us, I worship Stephen Batchelor as a god. That's a little joke.
We've got that whole levitation thing down. So
maybe there's the emphasis there now of trying to get back to what the founder thought, and trying to strip away anything that, in his view, was an addition to Buddhism from, let's say, Hinduism. Well, I want to say this. First of all, I rather believe it's a little bit like peeling an onion to find out what is the core teachings here. And even if you do find some very old core teachings, I want to say this, and this is, again, as a Mahayana practitioner. All these different ways of practicing are excellent paths suited to different feet. I read David McMahon's book, The Making of Buddhist Modernism, and it's an excellent book, but he's actually being a little critical. He's saying, these things we're doing about psychologizing a lot of Buddhist teachings, or bringing women's equality.
Demythologizing, I think, is one of the phrases that he used that I have a hard time pronouncing to this day.
Making meditation more front and center, or making this more of a lay practice. These are kind of late new inventions. And I sometimes say, well, that may be true, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. I do not turn to the Wright brothers for the last word in flying. I will not even turn to the Buddha, and he's the big boss, but I will not even turn to the Buddha and say he was right on all things. I will say he was a man of his time. He was a man of his culture, and he is not the last word necessarily in how, and again, this is just my view. Other people may they cherish their views. I am not the last word on Buddhism. But in my view, even Buddha was not the last word on Buddhism, and many of the developments that have happened to Buddhism since the 19th century are good. They strengthen Buddhism. May I give you one example?
Preaching to the choir, please.
The Japanese lineages started marrying in the late 19th century. And it was originally actually an attempt to weaken Buddhism by forcing the priests to marry, although a lot of them had already been marrying for a long time. And even to this day, the Japanese lineage priests are a little embarrassed about this. They kind of keep their wives in the back. They don't bring them to the monastery too often. And even here in the West, there's kind of a bit of a mixed feeling about we're more comfortable with being married priests, but still we don't quite understand why on the continent the priests are all celibate and we're not. Well, I actually find that this has strengthened Buddhism, even if it originally was meant to weaken Buddhism. Why? It brought these wonderful teachings out from the monastery into our living rooms, into our nurseries, into our daily lives. So I am proud to be a married priest with 2 kids. That is who I am. It's something good that happened to Buddhism, even if it breaks all tradition for 2,000 years. Again, in my limited view and for my own practice.
And just echoing what you're saying, that this diversity of views, I also find to be a strength of the tradition, that the Theravada practices and beliefs and rituals don't always match what has grown into Zen as an offshoot from a schism that occurred in old Theravada practice. That these are natural growths that I think secular Buddhism is another one of those manifestations. And in the same way that there was not always a smooth transition as new forms of Buddhism arose, there aren't now. There are accusations about this not being Buddhism. And the thing that I'd like to share as a thought on the diversity of a secular approach and Stephen's particular focus and his area of interest is in uncovering as best he can what Gautama may have thought and what that might be. And that's a great area for him to be in because that's what he knows very well and loves and has really cast an interesting light on some of what we see in the tradition. It's not actually my approach. What I find is that I'm interested in what that was, but I don't depend on it. And I think it's the Chanki Sutta in the Theravada tradition that goes into how do you know this is so, going back many generations, that something isn't of value because it's old or because a leader and someone we admire and respect said it. That doesn't make it factual, that people who are right in one area may be very wrong in others. And I know that's a bit of a heresy to say about Gautama, that maybe he was wrong as a human being.
And something's not good necessarily because it's new, and many of the changes we are making need to prove themselves. And let me underline one thing. Different roads for different walkers. For example, I am a married priest. I'm not saying all priests should be like that. I celebrate those who take a road of celibacy. I celebrate those who follow the Mahayana. I celebrate those who take the road of the Theravada. I celebrate those who are in a monastery or in a cave. Wonderful. We have room for all of us in Buddhism. And I tell you, for 2,500 years, we've had room for all kinds. And a few crazies like me, we're not going to ruin it all for everybody. I guarantee.
Even us. Yeah, I think that's a very important point, Jundo, is that you and I and many others agree on, is that we're not trying to take away from someone else's practice by doing things in a way that resonates best with us, nor is what we're doing an easy way out. It's not a lessening of the tradition. It's different. Yes, we'll acknowledge that. Completely agree, because our experience is different in what we're having in life. I want to steer us back just for a moment to words, because there's one that came up in our conversation prior to this interview in our emails back and forth with a reference to clergy and the term least. I wonder if you could spell that and say a little bit about that term.
Well, I'm calling the clergy in our Tree Leaf Sangha least, L-I-E-S-T, which is a lay priest But I want to be very clear what this means. First off, as I said, in our practice, the monastery is the children's nursery, the sick room, the workplace, the garden, the volunteer activity in the community. This is our monastery. And I am a married man with children. So I am a very strange Zen monk, because what kind of monk also has a teenager and a 4-year-old? So I'm saying that many of the Western priests are tearing themselves up about this, especially in the Japanese traditions. I know a couple of lineages, and again, every lineage can find their own way, but they're very confused about why the priests have kids and mortgages, and then they have this other category called lay teachers who cannot give the precepts, for example, and cannot perform certain ceremonies. What's the difference between the two? Well, one of the beauties of the Mahayana, for example, the Huayan perspective, is that you can be 100% fully something and simultaneously, without the least conflict, something that seems very conflicting. It's almost like we say you can have yes and no at the same time. So the traditional categories are, of course, ordained and lay, male and female. I say we step through those and, as Dogen would say, we actualize them all. I am thoroughly 100% priest when I'm leading our Sangha or leading Zazen. When I'm a father to my teenager, I am thoroughly a father. When I'm a husband, I am thoroughly that. When I am volunteering at the local hospice, there is my place where I am. I am there 100%. I am lay. I am priest. I am male. I am female. We step right through and dance it all without the least conflict. Are we lay? Are we priest? I sometimes say we're palay because we're so playful about it. But I like the word least. And another reason I choose least, L-I-E-S-T, is because I believe that being clergy is a position of service. You are to help the sentient beings. So we are the least among equals. So there's a nice little, that's in there too. So, we are thoroughly priests. We're as priesty as any Zen priest can be. And we're also, I'm a layman. I'm a dad. I'm a husband. All of that.
I would suggest to you, you're like Schrodinger's cat. You are Schrodinger's priests. You are both priests and laity at the same time.
It's quantum, Ted. It's quantum.
Oh, quantum woo. How much you vex me. So let's shift over. I want to ask about tree leaf Zendo and have you talk about that for a little bit. And for those who are listening to the podcast, I'll be linking to treeleaf.org is the link to that if you want to go take a look. But Jundo, tell us about tree leaf. What is that? How did it come about?
Tree leaf is another experiment that developed when I was in Florida, and I was witnessing some of our elderly members in a Sangha there get sick or be unable to drive, and they couldn't get to the meetings. So I said, isn't there a better way to do this? So I established a fully online Soto Zen Sangha for people who had physical limitations, unable to drive for reasons of age. They could come and, as best we could, offer everything that they would find in a Zen Sangha. And I found it was not only that after a while. Working people who had a Sangha right down the street, a Zen center right down the street, but because of their work schedule or their family obligations, they couldn't get there as much as they wanted. They need us. There are people living. We have members. We sat Zazen today online. One fellow was in Mexico. One fellow was in the Ukraine. One fellow was in Indonesia. We're all sitting together, and I'm in Japan. We're all sitting zazen together. We see each other on the camera, on the voice. I ring the bell. The Eno, the fellow doing the chanting, he's in Canada, and it all works well. We meet every day online. We discuss Zen. We do just about, we even have Jukai giving the precepts. We do just about everything. Now, the one criticism that people offered to us at the beginning. We're by the way, we're coming up to our 10th year.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you. The original criticism is it's online. It must be shifty. And I think our members, some of which many of whom have been with us for all those 10 years or many years, will tell you that even if it's online, we are talking together, sharing together. We're crying together. When a member gets cancer, we're all there with him together. When another one is going through a divorce, we're all together. We experience life together online. And as time passes, we know each other. We are truly a Sangha. As I like to say, according to the Mahayana viewpoint, it's this world, this universe is virtual, but our Sangha is real.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that. Congratulations on hitting your 10th year. And we have similar experiences with Practice Circle. We're approaching our 3rd year of online community, and it is a community of practitioners. On my other podcast, Present Moment, there's an interview that I've just recorded with Martin Aylward, and it's about a virtual Sangha that they have that's been getting together and having speakers like Stephen Batchelor, Martine Batchelor, and Martin himself, and many others, and what their experiences have been with this. And the creation of online, of using those tools, is an opportunity for us to reach people, to offer this practice to those who may be geographically isolated. There isn't a community nearby them at all, or they're ideologically isolated. There may be several communities that just don't fit with them. And so giving people a chance to connect with others, really, that's what these virtual communities do.
You're preaching to the converted here. One of the things I like to say is our members get to be together each day, and many Zen groups, they meet once a week, or the members can only go sometime. There is truly some richness that comes from being together day by day. So I salute more. There should be more Sangha making efforts like this.
I agree. So, Jundo, is there anything else that you'd like to share with the listeners?
Just that nobody in Buddhism has worked out the way for everyone. I believe that there, as Shakespeare said, I always misquote this, but there's more in heaven and earth than dreamt of in your philosophy, Horatio. I am open to the most fantastic possibilities of what could be true about claims made for many things. But in my limited view, for some practitioners, we could do without some things. And that's the road I walk. May we all walk together.
Thank you. Our guest today, Jundo Cohen. You can find out more about their work at treeleaf.org. Jundo, thanks for being here.
Thank you, Ted.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like to hear more about something you've heard in today's podcast, please come visit the SBA website at secularbuddhism.org, and you'll find an entire webpage devoted to this and every episode. Discussion about this episode can be found on the episode page itself, along with show notes. Sound editing, mixing, and mastering provided by the generosity of Anthony Dominello of StructureFromSound.com. The music for The Secular Buddhist is used by permission from John Kaizan Neptune's CD, Steps in Time. Additional music is provided courtesy of Monty Levinson of Taihei Shakuhachi and Rodrigo Rodriguez. Their websites are linked on the SBA site on the About Podcast Music page. Until next time, remember, every moment you have a choice. Make it the best you can. See you next time on The Secular Buddhist.